Hi there, welcome to Unit 5. We're speeding up the tempo at this point, it's going quite fast. So this unit is about identifying the gap in the literature and drafting the literature review. It's quite a chunky process, as we've seen. It's one of the ones that you identify as being one of the heaviest stages of the whole research process. But we will try and make it as painless as possible and give you as much formative feedback as we can so that you, when you draft your own, you'll feel fairly confident. So to this objective again, if you have time, go on the media sources. Again, the media sources at this stage may feel a little redundant. You may think, why am I doing this every day? But don't forget, again, it's in an effort to provide you with formative feedback. It's a dry run. The more you try this out, the easier it is going to be to select 3 of these pieces and to turn them into your assignment 2. If you try it out, you have interactions from your peers. I'm going to jump into and put a little bit of feedback on these forums. So by the time you get to Friday and you want to copy, paste, and select, and maybe expand a little, and that's it. Your assignment 2 is already there. You've voted on the work. So it's sort of incorporated and woven into the work that you do into each unit. So for that purpose, I would encourage you to at least select one and still make an effort and try and look at one with, again, the critical lens of researcher and try and see what is done well, what is not done so well, how you might reframe the questions, what might have been missed in the way that media question, that topic is being handled. But today, we're jumping. Why do I have 2 slides? Oh, yeah, the media purpose. So I was looking at the wrong slide. So why do we need a literature review? So there are 3 major goals that come into play when we look at the literature review. So we have seen that the scientific process is a momentum process, moving forward, getting closer and closer to this understanding of the world as it is. And even if it's not a finite process and will never end, we still are eager to carry forward this process and move forward. How do we move forward? We move forward by making a little step in the field collectively. Our efforts make the field collectively move forward a little bit, but we do that by basing ourselves on the work that has already been done just before us. So it's important as we begin to have a snapshot looking back so that we don't waste time trying to move from a point that has already been achieved. We want to move from a point that has not yet been achieved. Hence, this very timely 25th hour snapshot that looks back and says, right, what has been up to now? And here's why I'm taking my last step and I'm moving the whole field forward a tiny bit. So it's a very logical process. It has been done well because if you miss it, then either you're starting at the wrong place and you're trying to achieve things that have already been achieved, or then you're going too far. And there's things that need to be achieved before you get to that starting point that you're envisaging. So very important. Once you've done that and you've done that snapshots, you're looking ahead. So that's important too in the literature review, is that it sort of zooms in and shows you exactly what's missing and what is that tiny little area that you've identified where research hasn't been done, this little gap that you're going to fill, and then hence are going to take the field a little bit forward. So the first step is backwards, looking at the snapshots of the past just before you begin. The other part of the literature review is zoning in into that little area and defining the perimeters of that little area where nothing has been done yet. Okay. As we've seen, there are many angles to a question. You're starting to see this as you're preparing for Wednesday. So the literature review also serves to set the delineation. Things that you're not thinking about at first. You're thinking, I'm looking at students and students' use of gardens, of school gardens. Are you looking in Canada? Are you looking in a specific province? Are you looking in the global north? Are you looking worldwide? Are you looking in the global south? The delineation that you set of your questions is going to have huge impact on what you find and the research findings that you're looking at in terms of research literature review. So therefore, that's also the purpose of the literature review. It delineates exactly the parameters of what you're looking at, both in time and geographically, and sometimes in terms of culture as well. So if I talk about gender in education, it's an example we'll take later for your practice. Gender in education, if I talk about gender in education in the global north, it doesn't have the same meaning as if I talk about gender education in the global south. So if I didn't set those parameters in my literature review, I would produce a discourse that would not make any sense because it would have no points of reference. So that's also a very important part of the literature review. Okay, it sets the parameters, it delineates your question. So you've got a few more resources there that are talking to you about the same thing. How do we draft it? So we're going to look at a text from Hall, which is on gender in mathematics education. And in the form, you're going to tell me what your observations are on the lit review that is done in Hall. So it's going to be our practice run to see how we critique someone else's lit review before we get to see what we want to put in it. So jump in the form, read it first, just the lit review, and then jump in the form and give me your ideas as to what you think. Is it well done? Is it effective? Is it not effective? What are its limitations? What would you do differently? So you normally would pause the recording here and you would go and do what you need to do. Here are some more resources. I have to check them. I hope I haven't checked them this time around. I hope they're still all accessible websites, but hopefully they are. And let me give you a little bit of an explanation as to how we might do it. Live in classroom, obviously, I would have debriefed on the whole exercise, but I'm going to debrief here on video as you are yourself finishing in a form and then moving on. So the lit review is a zooming in process. So it's a snapshots of what's happened in the past, snapshots that should really be focused on the 10 years that are prior to your study. It's a snapshot that's going to start very wide and then it's going to zoom in to your niche area. So again, if you're talking about something like gender in education, as I've just mentioned, you're going to start talking about gender in education around the world and say there's this literature, there's this literature. Probably going to say there's this global north literature, this global south literature. And then you zoom in. I'm actually talking about the global north. Then you're going to say gender in literature in education. We have literature around gender in education amongst students themselves, discriminations, attitudes, perceptions. Gender in education amongst teachers, gender in education in terms of impact of one on the other. So teachers, gender on students. So you might say, I'm not interested in this, but it exists. You mention it. I'm not interested in this, but you mention it. I'm going to target this, the impact of gender on students. So you see we're zooming in already. Then once you look at that, you might then say, okay, here's a little body of literature. We have this in the post-secondary sector. We have this in the high school sector, middle school, elementary school. I'm interested in high school, so I disregard. I mention the rest of the literature, but I mentioned rapidly, and I disregard and say what I'm really looking is at this. Then you're looking at gender in high school in terms of impact of teacher gender on students. Then you might look at the body of literature and say, we see this in certain subjects, but not in others. I'm interested in this subject, so I'm disregarding the rest, and so on and so forth. You're zooming in like this. And then at the end of this, it's where you might be able to identify, say, there's a little niche area here, there's a gap in the literature. Now, obviously, it's a practice run for you. I'm not expecting that you are going to be spotting these gaps in the literature like this. To be honest, as I've said before, it's a bit of a contradictory exercise because normally we start with the research question and then we do the literature review. You're seeing that we can't really find a gap unless you do the literature review. It's not either what happens, because what happens is, to be honest, as academics, that we attend a lot of conferences, we talk to colleagues, we work in a certain fields, we read stuff that comes out in journals. So we've got a good idea in our head of what's done and it's not done and what's out there and where there's the gap is. And that's what allows us to actually design a question and then move on to the literature review. So for established long-term academics, it's actually a very easy process, fairly intuitive. From experience, we know, well, no one's doing this. And then I'm doing my lit review and then I'm presenting my gap in the literature. For you as students, it's very difficult because you don't have that sixth sense. You don't have that experience from having seen and been to places and, been to conferences and listened to all that. So you don't have that intuitive understanding of where the gaps are. So for you, unfortunately, it's going to really be the literature review itself that leads to the gap when you do it for real. In this case, it's practice, right? It's the first trial of the proposal. So we are going to follow the regular process where you choose a question, you do the literature review. This may mean that you end up somewhere where there isn't a gap. We're not going to penalize you for this. What you're doing is a dry run at constructing, at building the proposal, at carrying out every steps and being able to do it autonomously. That it's not successful here does not matter. It's a practice, okay? So you're not judged at all on that. In the real world, hopefully you would get to a point where there's actually a gap there and you can actually do the exercise for real and actually lead to something new, something emerging. So that's the process. So now you've reviewed the text, you've given me your opinion on the lit review, you understand what the lit review is about and how it's set up. So a few questions that students often have at this point. What's the difference between a lit review and a meta-analysis? So I partly answered that yesterday. As you know, a meta-analysis is not a lit review. It looks like a lit review, but it actually is the product of methodology. The methodology that is using library search engines to actually identify trends in other studies' findings. So it looks like a long lit review, but in fact, a lit review does not have methodology. A meta-analysis has a methodology. A lit review is just your sense, right? No one expects you in a lit review to be using search engines and to be systematic. That's why a meta-analysis is also called a systematic review, which means there's nothing is missing. You've added that automated element so that nothing is missing. It's not just your view of the field, it's the library search engine's view of the field when nothing has been missed. Okay, so different in that sense. Do you present in the past or in the present? You have a choice. You'll see both, but be consistent. That's the only important thing. It's going to look weird if you start in the present and you finish in the past. So just try and have consistency within your document. How long should it be? So a normal journal article is 5,000 words. It would not be unusual for a literature review, a good literature review, to reach 1,000, because you really are supposed to set the entire context and take your reader right there. And if you do that well, then your research question sort of flows from there. There's nothing to add. It can be less. I would say 700 to 1,000 words, no more than 1,000 words, because then you're eating into your data collection and data analysis, and you don't want that either. Is there such a thing as too much info? They can be. You don't need 20 references for a point you're making. You need 2 or 3 if it's an important point. Don't forget that as you zoom in, you might be giving references to things that exist but you're not interested in, and you're disregarding them very quickly. There's no point listing tons of references for that. You might list one here, one here. This is indicative of this aspect of research. This is indicative of this aspect of research, but I'm not looking at that. I'm zooming in on this third aspect. So you would only probably use one reference for that. So don't waste time providing references for areas that you're not actually retaining, but those that you're dismissing can be really quickly written off with maybe one reference as an example. What should be my cutoff dates? We've talked about this, 10 years. But 5 years, if you are looking at something which is really innovative and creative and changing in its nature. So technology, things like this, it wouldn't be, would be 10 years then. So I hope that answers all your questions, but I will put a little form for questions on the preview as well, so that you can actually post any questions that you have at this stage directly on the form for Unit 5. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a homework. We're going to do a trial run. And what I'm going to do is, this is due by Friday. Your real lit review is also going to be postponed to later, because you're going to want to do it well. So I'm not going to rush you. So instead, I think take some time to do the formative exercise first. Try and get this into me by Friday, and then you'll do the lit review during the rest of the summer after your next course. So I think it's really important, because normally we troubleshoot a ton of things when we do this live in class. So I think it's really worth doing this and actually taking the time. This isn't assessed, so also it's risk-free. You're just going to be getting formative feedback, but trying it out is going to be helpful. And trying it out is going to take a bit of time. So we can't really expect that you do both before Friday. So try this, and then you'll do the real thing afterwards. So I've set the parameters to try and make it easy, because we can't debate forever what you're going to be researching on. You've seen in examples that I've given, I followed with the whole exercise. I'm looking at something similar, so that we're not diverting and going all over the place. So I'm suggesting choose a partner or partners. You can do it on your own, but in the order of saving time, if you want to, it'd be fine to do with someone else. It doesn't require synchronous or too much synchronous coordination. You might want to chat quickly and then actually break up the work and then do it and then come back and put it all together. So you can do it with one partner, you can do it with multiple partners, you can do it on your own, and then produce a literature review. I'm not expecting 1,000 words. Try and do a sort of 600-700 words. That would be fine. So what does the literature tell us about the impact of gender of teachers on classroom dynamics, right? So I've been looking at very similar things in examples I've given you. So the impact of the gender of teachers on classroom dynamics. The context is going to be very important. So for the sake of this exercise, we're going to limit ourselves to the global north, English-speaking global north, so North America, UK, Australia, New Zealand, avoiding the rest of Europe because it's not English-speaking. And we're going to look at high school. To be honest, if your group or you want to look at elementary school or middle school, I'm not bothered. I'm just fixing it arbitrarily. That's not important, but do fix the sector, because it's going to obviously change the scope of your lit review. So try that, and then I'll do it too. and then we'll exchange by Friday, and then I'll give you some formative feedback on your trial. So I think that's going to be useful. So try, you can spend some of the morning today. I know you're probably going to be focused on your team assignment, so I'm not being unrealistic. I know not much is going to get done on this before you all go through that team assignment. That's probably going to eat up a lot of your time. But you can come back to this in the evening, or you can come back to this on Friday. You can use the weekend as well if you want. But try that. It'll be useful if we can have a draft. And again, it's risk-free, right? You're not assessed on this. You're just going to get feedback. So why not do it and then use it? And then your own lit review will be all the more perfect for it. And you've got a few references here. One of them is through the library. I've given you the link. And then you've got one which is on PDF format, and that's just the whole article from which we were working just for the purpose of an illustration. These two are out of date, but again, to tell you the truth, in matters like this, this is the only course when I don't impose that same tenure rule on myself. Normally, I really try and stick to 2018, 2019 articles. But when it comes to methodology, when it comes to this classical, traditional sort of exercises in research, they haven't changed, right? Methods haven't changed, processes haven't changed. So here, the relevance of taking something really which is just up to date isn't that drastic. And these are open access. Well, one through library definitely available, and the other one's a whole book and it's available for open access. So make the most of it. I'd rather give you that and have open access than give you something that you have to buy. That would make no sense. So we finish here. This is really quick, but obviously, as you see, it's going to generate that practice. So that's why you're going to be putting the time, not necessarily in posting on forum or in answering question, but in this half day, you're going to be able to go straight into that and try your practice at this lit review. It may seem daunting as you start. It's not that daunting. It's just an exercise. You get it completely wrong, I'm going to help you and tell you where you got it completely wrong. It's not going to be more fearful than that. So don't hesitate. Try that. And again, deadline would be Friday night, just because I don't want to eat up your weekend. But if you want to do it on weekend, that's totally fine too. But obviously, we're not going to be submitting next week because you'll be working on your other course next week. So that's the end of Unit 5, and I will see you in the afternoon for your team presentations, which will be a lot of fun. Yes. I'm getting confused now if I got the right. Yes, no, not team presentation. Sorry. I'm recording this advanced. So it's Wednesday and you're doing your research question presentation in the afternoon, not your team presentation. Let me not confuse you. But I know that's also going to be anxiety producing, and you're probably going to be focusing on that. So it's probably going to eat up part of your morning too. So I will see you this afternoon during the afternoon in the two sessions, the two groups for your question presentation, your research question presentation. Bye for now.